Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you watching. The very first live class ever for Web 285 Emerging Web Technologies. This is a brand new class that we're getting to run for the first time this spring. And we are teaching React. And React, I think, is a big deal, for the modern web. Right? When we look at emerging web technologies, one of the things that I wanted to have for this course, which is, it's kind of what I said during the welcome and orientation video there, is I wanted this course to be a course that we can kind of morph and change and do different things in over the years. And I think, at least for the next couple of years, this will be a React-based course, just because React is this emerging web technology. It's used in a whole lot of places. And I don't necessarily see it going anywhere anytime soon. The only thing that might change is React going from an emerging web technology to just being a web technology. Right? Because it's only about 10 years old when a lot of the other stuff that we use on the web is, 20 years old, 25, 30 years old, or older, right? So relatively young as far as all that goes. And I think, a lot of the stuff that's emerging right now still has at least a couple years to go before it gets traction enough to where it'd be something that I would want to teach in a course. So with that being said, we're going to talk about React this semester, and we're going to do a lot with React. And React really, one of the reasons I also wanted to teach React is because it sets you up for mobile apps, right? If you wanted to do some mobile apps. React has a library that you can use with it called React Native. Maybe we will touch on that a little bit when we get to our advanced React section, which is Module 7. But you can basically write once and render everywhere. You can render for, a web application. You can render for an iOS application. You can render for a Android application if you have, if you're utilizing React Native, which is an addition onto React that we'll look at a little bit later on in the semester. But just a couple things about the structure of the course before we kind of get into things today. One is that something that, some of you might notice is that I don't have a slide deck on screen in front of me right now. I have the React website. My goal is to not use a single slide deck for this course this semester at all, right, for these live classes. I'd like for these live classes to primarily be hands-on. And, as this is the, last semester for many of you, as we're approaching these problems, I also want you all to kind of get more of a realistic view of how, development and things of that nature works. Right? So, that's kind of going to be part of our approach here. I was just bold enough to say it in the modules where we see, like on some of the module assignments, I have module assignments for module 2 and 3 up now. And there's actually a line in there that says, like, you might not be able to solve this lab completely with just what's in the module. It might require a little bit of outside research to be able to fix it and do what you need to do with it. And, that's part of that preparation that we need here, right? Like, if I told you everything you need to do, you're not really getting a realistic experience as a developer, right? Because in the real world, nobody's going to tell a developer everything that they need to do. If they could tell them that, they wouldn't need them. right? And so that's part of the things that we're going to be doing this semester is adding in some elements of, I have to go out and kind of find out a way to solve my problems as I'm approaching them. Because, it's about time to take those training wheels off and get you out into the real world, right? So, or the real world's not a great way to put that, is it? Just, get you into the working professional developer world. I think is a better way to put that. Because this is the real world. It's just a different real world. All right, so what I'd like to do today is I'm just going to kind of talk about React a little bit, kind of walk through the docs a little bit for you all, and I'm going to walk through the process of using Create React App and all that kind of stuff to get an application up and running, which is your assignment for Module 1. Just get an application up and running, get it on GitHub. Right, which in a way is not very realistic because we're actually using some software to convert it to something that is usable on a regular LAMP stack, whereas if we were using Node and React in the real world, we'd be putting it on a MERN stack or something of that nature, right? So we're modifying a little bit to make it easy on us, so we don't need our own server to work with here. Because server management's going to be its own challenges this semester. So there is that. But we are working in React, and we're going to get really familiar with the docs over the course of the semester. All right, so let's click on those docs, or let's check out the beta docs that they have here, since that'll probably be just released to the public instead of beta here before long. So let's go ahead and look at these beta docs. And this is our documentation reference. And so this is where you're going to go to kind of help figure out certain things, less so for this week and more so for future weeks. Right, although we do have an installation documentation here. Well, we see we have two tabs here, Learn and Reference. I guess before we get too deep into this, let's just talk about what React is just a little bit. So React is a front-end framework. So we're still primarily on the front end here in terms of what we're doing. You'll get a little bit of back end. You've gotten a little bit of back end in some other courses. You'll get a little bit more back end for those of you who are in the Web 225, the Content Management Systems course. This semester, that's more back end as well. Like you're getting your hands dirty with a server installation or working with a server and installing things on a server and dealing with all that kind of fun stuff. And so we have this Learn tab and we have this Reference tab, and both of these tabs will be something that we'll want to use throughout the semester. Because we see all the hooks, which we'll talk more about hooks later on. We'll talk about APIs later on, some different APIs that we can use. We'll talk about these APIs when we get to that module. Create context, forward ref, lazy memo, start transition. The different components. And various other things here that we can work with. But this gives you the documentation. It gives you things to look through. Common components, how things work. And you'll see that a lot of it looks very similar to HTML. And, one of the things that we discuss in the module is that it does kind of look very similar to HTML. But it's not HTML. It's not HTML. It's JSX, right? Which is going to look very similar to HTML. But don't be fooled. Because some of these tags that we'll use in this thing that looks like HTML are going to be not HTML tags at all. We can make up our own tags and put them in there as long as we define them. Right? That's another thing that we can do here. We'll get into that in future weeks as we kind of progress through. This learn here, this learn section of the React docs is also a good way to kind of go through this on your own if you want to try out some different stuff. I'm using sort of things that I know and some different resources for the course. So if you want to engage in something different and get a little bit of a different perspective, it's the same material. It's just going to be utilized or taught in different ways. So using the quick start here in React and doing the different things here in the React documentation is another way that you can kind of get some extra practice as you're kind of working through different things here. So it's some things to think about. React was created by a team at Meta initially, or Facebook, right? Facebook is, uses React as its sort of front-end backbone. In 2014, I think it was open sourced to community, right? So everybody can contribute to React nowadays. As I've mentioned previously, it does require its own stack or its own technology stack to run on, right? Which is typically a MERN stack, MERN. We're typically used to running on some kind of XAMPP stack. Which those of you who are, taking the Web 225 class now, I believe you're in your first module, you're getting accustomed to your LAMP stack server, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And then our MERN stack is going to be, the M could be MySQL. It also could be a non-relational database like MongoDB. The E is for Express.js, which is going to be sort of the Apache equivalent for the MERN stack. The R, of course, is React, which is going to be our PHP sort of equivalent. And the N is Node.js, which is also a piece of software that you'll need to install. So you'll need to install the React library. You'll also need to install Node.js on your machines. You have instructions in the module on how to do those. You'll install Node.js first. That'll give you, you'll get Node and NPM, and then you can use NPM to do the installation. Which we have those install guides in the module. So you'll want to be able to do that. From there, right, you can just start working on your projects. And it's, it is easier to some degree because to get started, you don't have to write a whole lot of code, right? You could just sort of write a couple little commands, and those commands will turn into a whole bunch of code. Right, so I think that's what I want to do today, is just kind of focus on getting something up and running here. Right, so ideally, especially if you've taken Web 140, you have Git and GitHub, so you have that knowledge. We'll be working in VS Code to do basically everything. We'll be saving our code to GitHub, but we'll also be making a live site on GitHub using a special way to do it. And so I already have all the software installed here that I'm going to need. So I'm just going to kind of go through the process, and I'm going to talk our way through it as we're going. So one of the first things that I want to do is, I like to do everything from VS Code because you can, right? If you use your terminal and create a new terminal, you can go anywhere, right? Like I can go to my E drive, and on my E drive, I can make a directory for React projects. So that's make dir React projects. And that's going to make a folder on my E drive called React projects. Right? And so if I navigate through my folders here, E, and we can find it here somewhere, so many folders, React projects, right? This is the folder that I just made. It did not exist until I ran these commands. And so since I have Node and NPM and React.js already installed on my machine, I can just start to run a few commands that are going to populate this folder with all the files that I'm going to need to write my project. And so we're going to write npx, which is np execute, right? So we're going to be running a specific, we're going to be executing a specific command here. And the command that we're going to be executing is called create-react-app. Right, so that's npx space create-react-app. Now, one of the things that I didn't do here that I need to make sure that I do before I do it, so I'm glad that I caught this, is I actually need to cd into that folder that I just created. I need to change directories into React projects. So I'm actually installing these files in my React projects folder instead of just my E drive, which it would have done otherwise had I not did that. So now we'll include npx create-react-app. And then the only other thing that I need to do here is give it a name. Right, and so that we'll call this one first-project. And I'm going to try to be able to get this folder up here as quickly as possible just so you can see kind of the files populating into it. So I'm going to hit enter here to get this command started. And I'm going to come over here and pull up this folder so we can see what happens. So we see the first thing it does is it creates another folder. Right? It creates a folder inside our React projects folder that has the name of whatever we gave the name of it there. So I'm going to double click that to go in, and we can start to see all the files start to populate here. Now it's going to make an absolute ton of files. An absolute ton of files here is what it's going to make. There are several folders, several files, right? And these are all things that we need to be able to run a React application on our machine, right? So it's installing Node modules into this folder. It's installing a bunch of stuff right now. So we're just kind of hanging out, watching all of the text fly by down here on the bottom. If I go into that folder, like you can see all the modules that it's installing. It's installing a ton of stuff, so it might take some time, right? Like I'm just scrolling down forever here, it seems like. And I think it is almost done. There it is, it's done. And so we can look and we can see, okay, we have a public folder here. This public folder has some front-end facing items on it, right? If we try to run that index.html right now, there's nothing there, right? We're used to working with an index.html and a lamp stack or some kind of amp stack. There's nothing there in that index.html right now. And it's because that's not what kind of site this is. That's just there to kind of be in the way. If we go into our source file here, that's where we see all of our code files for this. And so our big important one for us for React applications is the app.js file. And if we go into Visual Studio Code here, we can actually open that folder. So I'm going to open the folder. I'm going to go to the E drive. I'm going to find that React projects folder. And I'm going to find that first project folder. And that's the folder that I'm going to select to open up here. Yes, I trust the authors. And I'm also going to bring back the terminal here because we're going to need that here in a minute. Now, one of the things to note here is that I am in that first project folder in my terminal here. That's the one I need to be in to run my application when it comes time to run our application. Right, so we're going to run. Right, and we'll run this in a few minutes. And the first thing I want to do is I want to look at these files. I want to specifically look at the app.js file so we can see what it looks like compared to our website that we get when we run our React application. And what we can see here is we can see that, it's got our code here. Again, it looks like, a lot of this looks like HTML. It kind of looks like HTML and JavaScript had a baby, right? We can kind of see, we have a function here. We have a return statement here. And we have these things in here that look like HTML tags. One of the important things for us to note, right, that's super important, is that everything is wrapped into a singular parent. In our return statement in React, all of your HTML has to have a singular, or all of your JSX rather, all of your JSX has to have a singular parent. Right? If I were to try to come outside of this div and put another div here, you immediately see I get squiggles everywhere. That's not going to work. I have to have a singular parent with everything in it. I can put as much as I want inside of that singular parent, but I have to have just like one singular parent for the project, like we see here. Div class name equals app and a /div at the end. Now that is one thing that we can see here is that sets this apart from HTML, by the way, is that we see class name here. Whereas in HTML, we might just use class, right? This has class name. So that's one thing that shows us that this is different from HTML. Another thing that we see here is the idea of logo here. That formatting that we see there is called a component, or it's in and a hook. We have hooks and components that we're using here, which aren't directly in HTML as well. That's something that's added on by React. So all of these things make this different from HTML. And if I tried to run this, as we've seen, if I tried to run it directly, it doesn't work. It needs to run on a server, just like PHP, right? Like if I try to run a PHP file on my computer on its own, that's not running on a PHP server, it's not going to work. I have to actually run it on as a part of a server. So I need to use npm here to actually start a server that will start this application. So I'm just going to make sure I have it saved here so everything's good there. And I'm just going to run. Now, one of the things that I want to point out right before I do this, don't want to get ahead of myself, I want to make sure that I am in the folder for the project. Right? If you'll remember, we gave it a name. That name made a new folder. Right? When you just run the npx create-react-app, you'll be in the root folder, the product, the overall folder. And so if I tried to run my npm start while I was here, it wouldn't know what I was trying to run. So I need to make sure that I am in that project folder for the app. So we should be able to run the dir command, the dir command, and see node modules, public, source, all that kind of stuff. Right? If we can't see those things, it won't know what to start. Right? So here I can run npm start, and it's just as simple as that to start our server. Right? It'll take a second, it'll spin things up, and it'll give us a URL that we can go to our development server on. It's going to be localhost 3000, which we see here, localhost 3000, or for other computers on our network, they can go to 172.20.7.120.3000 while this is open and running. And so as we look at that, this is what that looks like, right? This is my site. Now, one of the things that's interesting about React is that, in HTML and CSS, we talk about the DOM a lot, the document object model. This does not use the traditional document object model that we're used to. It uses something called the virtual DOM. So it takes the DOM of the code that you write in JSX and it virtualizes it, which means that we don't have to make changes and refresh things when we make changes to our sites. Right? You might be used to, just making regular HTML files. If you make a change, you have to go back, you have to refresh, you have to start it again. Right? Like if you're working in Replit, you have to hit run again, or if you're working in a browser, you might have to hit refresh. With React, we don't have that. Right? It just automatically makes the changes as it updates the DOM. So in order for us to see that, I'm going to try to get as much on one screen as possible here. So on the right, we have my React application running on our server, and on my left here, I have my code window. Let's change the information for this link here. Right now, if I click on this link, it takes me to the react.js site that we looked at previously in class. Let's make it the Cleveland Community College website. So instead of reactjs.org, I'm going to change that to clevelandcc.edu. And I'm going to change this learn React here, that's a part of that anchor tag, to visit Cleveland Community College. Now, nothing's changed over here yet, because in order to see the changes, I have to save. But once I save, we see the changes automatically happen. Right? Like I didn't refresh this window. I don't have any kind of auto refresh turned on over here. Right? The changes just automatically happened. And so any changes that I make here in this code file, for example, if I edit this paragraph, I can edit it to a little, let's say a hello world. As soon as that file is saved, it updates the virtual DOM, and it puts whatever changes you made onto the site, which is super useful, especially for when we're getting into things like React Router. I was going to say, I had in my mind to say React Router and routing at the same time. When we get to React Router in a couple modules, we'll see one of the reasons why this is super useful for us. And so in the first module, this is basically all it requires you to do is to kind of build a project and run it and make a couple changes to it before you send it off. So what I'd like to do now is go to the next thing, which is to actually send this to GitHub. Right, so I'm going to hit Control C here to terminate my server and get me back to where I need to be. And so from here, I'm just going to run my standard GitHub commands to get this code into my GitHub. Right, so I'm going to make a new GitHub project. I'm going to call it first React Proj. And I'm going to leave everything else the same and create the repository. And so now I can just, do the standard, do this first section here, and push this code to this React project. Right, so I'm going to run git init, git add period, git commit -m first commit. And that's going to stage all my files. And remember, you can just follow along with the instructions that it gives you on GitHub. You can do this where you make branch main. The only difference is that when you get down here, git push u origin main versus git push u origin master. So if I change the branch to main, I'll just copy and paste that here. We'll add our remote origin by just copying and pasting this line. And then I can push git push origin main. And it's going to take it's going to take a few seconds, right? If you're on slower internet, it might take you a little bit longer because there are a lot of files here that it's pushing up. And when we go back to our GitHub now, we're going to see that's the wrong window. We're going to see when we refresh that we have all our files here. And all of our files are on our main branch. And this is how I'm going to check your code. Right? Because I want to be able to go into the source folder here, look at your app.js file or whatever other .js files that you have, and see the code that you've written. But to have a live application, we actually need to add some more information and do something a little bit differently. And as we do this, we're actually going to be able to, it's going to create another branch for us that will be for our live pages. Right, so that way I have one branch that has your code that is uncompiled and another branch that utilizes compiled code, since we're not using a MERN stack, just so I can see a live version of your site. And so in VS Code here, we are going to run an npm command. So let me zoom in here so we can see this a little bit better. We're going to run npm install gh-pages --save-dev. Right, that's the command we want to run. So we're going to save any development that's been done. We're going to install GitHub Pages on top of it. That's going to add a little compiler that's going to take our React, compile it to just standard HTML and CSS, and be able to push it to a GitHub site. And it'll take a few minutes, just like before, to install all the files that it needs to install. but it's fine. Then what we need to do is we need to find our package.json file to add a home page property to it. And this is going to require you to know a little bit about GitHub to be able to understand it. So in my package.json file here, I want to find my version number. And I want to add a new line of code underneath it. And this is going to define a home page. And my home page is going to be, it's going to follow a certain pattern, right? It's going to follow https:// your username on GitHub .github.io / the name of the repository, the repo name. So what I want to do is I just want to replace the username with my username on GitHub, which is just DE Ramsey. So yours will be whatever your GitHub username is. And the name of the repository that we've built here, which is First React Proj. First React Proj. So now it knows where the index file is going to live for your home page. We're also going to want to add a couple scripts to this file. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to find the scripts object here. And I'm going to add a couple scripts here. I'm going to add a pre-deploy and I'm going to add a deploy, right? So just at the very beginning of this, I'm going to add a pre-deploy script. Pre-deploy. And that pre-deploy script is going to reference our npm run. So it's going to be npm run build. And then our deploy script is going to be gh-pages, gh-pages-d build. All right, so this is going to create a branch for us called gh-pages, and it's going to build and put that there. Now, we've already ran our remote origin, right? We already made our remote origin when we pushed our code. So we already know that. So that's all we need to do, right? We just need to add these two lines here, the pre-deploy and the deploy line, plus the line here that tells it where its home page is going to be. So once we save that, I can just run another command down here in my terminal. That will make it happen, which is going to be simply npm run deploy. And that is going to build this site, right? Compile all the code into just standard HTML and CSS files. And it's going to push it to our GitHub and publish it as a GitHub page, just all in one. Right, so if I look at my repo now, we'll give it a little refresh. Watch that one branch right there. Watch what happens to that one branch when I refresh that. It's now become two branches. And so if I look here, I see that I have a main branch and I have a GitHub Pages branch. And if I click that GitHub Pages branch, I can see what that code is like in that GitHub Pages branch. And I can look here in the static code and I can see the static code that's been written and applied here. Right, it's just taking that React code that was in that base file and compiling it into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that we can host and see on GitHub Pages. Now, if we go to our settings, where GitHub Pages is, we can look at the Pages part and we can see we already have a live site that was deployed using our GitHub Pages branch. If we click that, we can see there is our live site. Now, it is key to note that you want to make sure that you are finished working on your site before you use this deploy, right? Because otherwise you'd have to delete the branch and redeploy, which is less than ideal, right? Since it is compiling all the code. But with that being said, it really is just as simple as that to do what we need to do for a React application. And so this is probably as explicit as I'm going to be in terms of telling you everything to do for the entire semester. All right, I basically did your Module 1 assignment for you here. But I really want to make sure, first and foremost, that you are able to get a React application built, edited, and then sent off to GitHub to where we can actually see a live version of the page. And we can click that and go to the Cleveland Community College website. And so that's all that I have for you for this week. If you have any questions, please let me know, whether it's on, Teams or email, or, we'll hang out in the chat for a couple of seconds here in case anybody who's here with me live has any questions. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.